Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm James Landay. I'm the Vice Director and Faculty Director of Research at Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI, or HAI. And tonight I have the privilege of welcoming you to the Stanford HAI Congressional Boot Camp on AI. This AI policy boot camp has brought to Stanford's campus 28 bipartisan and bicameral congressional staff for a 3-day multidisciplinary training on AI from the HAI community. During this rigorous training, our boot camp staffers learned about topics ranging from AI's role in education and healthcare, the future of work, mitigating risk in AI, to even going through a thought-provoking crisis simulation on AI. So we put them to work. And international security, that was developed here at the Hoover Institution and the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. And of course, this evening, we will hear from our esteemed panel about the impacts of AI on democracy. Ultimately, we hope our boot campers will walk away with a greater understanding of what human-centered AI means and apply this to their work back in Washington. Stanford has been hosting congressional staff for tech policy boot camps for nearly a decade. And it should be no surprise that for this particular year, we had the most interest ever, with a nearly 40% application increase from congressional staff over last year. AI has firmly entered the public's consciousness and that of policymakers as well. Today, there is broad discussion about government policies that invest in AI, as well as how society can regulate the technology. But while we have this new awakening of AI, HAI has been here, helping policymakers understand the complexity of the challenge and the moment we are facing. In fact, early next year, we will be celebrating our 5th anniversary as an institute, and it is through HAI's multidisciplinary approach and broad relationships that we are one of the only academic institutes that's successfully undertaken such comprehensive training in AI for policymakers. It is through our campus partnerships that we've been able to successfully grow the Institute and deliver important programs such as this, and is why I must thank the Hoover Institution for hosting us this evening, as well as recognize the other Stanford schools such as the School of Law, the Dorr School of Sustainability, the Schools of Engineering, Education, and Medicine, and many faculty across this campus for their time, support, and commitment to ensuring policymakers are fully informed on the opportunities and challenges of AI. To the congressional staff present, I'd like to thank you for making this journey out here. We appreciate you, and we are grateful for your public service. Finally, I'd like to thank the HAI staff, their dedication and commitment to excellence. This program took a team months of planning, and we have so much gratitude to all of you. In fact, we should give them a round of applause. And now I have the honor of introducing the final session of the boot camp and this evening's keynote panel. This particular panel session is focused on how AI is currently and will in the future impact democracy. Condoleezza Rice is a professor here at Stanford, and she's the Tad and Diane Taub Director of the Hoover Institution. She served as the nation's 66th Secretary of State, and we're proud to have her as a member of HAI's Advisory Council. And I could go on for pages if we're going to really do her justice, but so that we can get to this, we'll skip, but we're just honored to have her involved with HAI. Fei-Fei Li is the Sequoia Professor in the Department of Computer Science at Stanford. She is the co-founder of HAI. She is the co-director and our leader of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI, as well as a pioneer of the deep learning revolution in AI, which underpins all of the activity that you see in AI today. Wouldn't have happened without her. And finally, our moderator this evening has been a champion of democracy worldwide. Larry Diamond is the William L. Clayton Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and the Mosbacher Senior Fellow in Global Democracy at the Freeman Spogli Institute for National Studies, and he's also my neighbor and good friend. So please help welcome our speakers with a warm round of applause, and I'll turn it over to Larry.
Well, thank you so much, James, and thank you, Condi and Feifei. What an honor to be able to share this stage with you. If you don't mind, I'd like to begin with a pretty big challenge for democracy, which is information integrity. Condi knows, as a political scientist who studied the Soviet Union, it goes way back before that disinformation is not a new phenomenon. But digital technology has supercharged it, and AI seems to have the capacity to do that at an exponential scale. And we're in deep trouble because we can no longer agree on what constitutes facts and truth, and on who should be the arbiter of truthful information. So what I'd like to ask you both to start is, what is the proper role for government in addressing the dangers of, if I can put it this way, industrial scale disinformation? And we're struggling a little bit with this in the academy. What are the role for non-governmental institutions in helping us to identify and prime maybe the social media companies to think about how to meet the challenge of disinformation?
Well, first of all, welcome to everyone. And okay, so I'll take on the challenge. Yes, this is a tremendous challenge to democracy, because ultimately democracy rests on the exchange of ideas, and it also rests on trust that what you are hearing and what you are discussing has some element of, let's call it, truth underneath it. Now, we all know that not only has there been disinformation from the Soviet Union or from China or from others, but the truth has not always been at the core of democracy, even in our own country. I remind people that Thomas Jefferson actually sent around a circular saying that George Washington was senile, because he was angry about his relationship with Alexander Hamilton. So human beings have this propensity sometimes not to tell the truth, or to shade the truth, or to tell an alternative truth. And so that's not a new problem. But you're right, it's now industrial strength as we think about the technological accelerator for the degree to which this lack of truth or this disinformation invades and permeates the entire democratic system. And so not only can we not trust what we're hearing, we then don't trust each other. And I think the biggest problem is that we don't trust each other. Now, you asked another question, which is who can be the arbiter of this? Now, let me first of all say that I think we will do very well to be very careful in how we start to actually define truth and disinformation. Because sometimes I hear it's disinformation or it's truth if you simply disagree with me, right? So my truth is my truth, and if you disagree, that's disinformation. I think we need to limit what constitutes truth and be very careful about that. So I'm going to use an example during the COVID period. We thought that there were certain truths about COVID in the scientific community. We're now learning that actually a lot of those were not truths. They were best guesstimates. I don't blame anybody for them, but I kept hearing, we have to follow the science. We have to be truthful. Actually, it turns out there was room for debate about what was truthful and what wasn't. And in a democracy, we're not afraid of debating ideas without saying that the other side's lying. So partly this is on us, not the government, not the social media companies, not the platforms. It's on us to actually think hard about when we want to claim the truth for ourselves, rather than say, okay, let's debate what is true. The second point that I'll make is I'm really nervous about the government being too involved in this because we have a lot of extremely valued rights. To me, the most important one is the right of free speech. And so I understand that there may be times when we want to be, we need to be careful about what we say or so. But if we ever lose as a basis free speech, we've lost the basis of democracy. And then finally, let me just say one other thing. I do not feel that way about doing something about the disinformation that comes at us from other countries. So I think we ought to be all over what the Russians are doing, all over what the Chinese are doing. They do not, in my world, have freedom of speech in the United States. We, as Americans, however, do. And there, I would have the government be very careful about impinging.
Okay, so first of all, as the co-director of HAI, I really welcome everybody. It's one thing since I become a founding co-director of HAI that I believed is a deep collaboration between the technical world, both at Stanford as well as outside of Stanford, with the policy thinking world. And since it's been 4 years that HAI has been on a mission to trying to collaborate with the policy institutes at Stanford, including the Freeman Spogli Institute. Director Mike McFaul is sitting there, as well as the Hoover Institute with Condi Rice. So back to this question, Larry, I hope we do say, I want to say that there's more than dis or misinformation that coming from supercharged technology that disrupts democracy, that potentially disrupts democracy. I hope we get to that. But now we're talking about dis and misinformation, and everybody, I have to tell you a story. If you become a Stanford faculty, I don't know about all of you, but I always dream of getting to know a secret office in this university. And to me, it's like the ultimate secret of Stanford, and that's the college admission office. I don't know where they are. I've never met them. I don't know these people till I got a phone call just a couple of months ago. And it's thanks to AI, thanks to GPT technology, thanks to the potential fake essays that applicants might be writing, that I finally knew there are humans existing in this office. So this impact of this technology is more than just democracy. It's as a technologist, I want to actually offer some hope, because it's such a dystopia topic when we talk about dis and misinformation, as if machines are so powerful, and the capability of these generative AI, whether it's text form, or if you play with Midjourney, in pixel form, video form, speech form, a lot of humans, everyday citizens, especially if you're not an AI technologist, you almost feel that you just almost want to give up your agency, as if there's no way we can beat the machines, right? How can I even tell this essay, this news piece, this photograph is fake or not fake? Actually, I think one of the beauty of technology and being a technologist, knowing this, is we also have hope to combat that. And I think there is technological hope as well as societal hope. The technological hope is actually a mixture of different technology. For example, digital authentication. I still remember Mike and I having this conversation earlier this year when we learned about fake videos of Mike coming from certain part of the world, and right, Russia. And we talk about the future of this technology using digital authentication. There is going to be more algorithmic approaches. It is not there yet, that will be identifying, the dis and misinformation. There might be hardware solutions. I work in the field of computer vision and robotic learning, and I know there are work in my field that are looking at both hardware and software combined digital authentication. So in a way, as long as our democracy thrives, as long as our society thrives, as long as our innovative ecosystem thrives, there are technological solutions for this. In the meantime, I just want to say it's also important that technology works with societal measures. We have companies that are, even for their own business, they really care about this, right? For just one example, Adobe is putting a lot of resource and effort in this this area of technology because it matters to their business. And I think that if we take a human-centered, take a societal-centered approach to business, it doesn't even have to come from government. There will be norms and there will be measures coming from the business world. And last but not the least, education. I think that it's so important we up the game of not only in K-12 education, but also continued education of what this technology is about to not only our policymakers, but just the society at large.
Great. Well, you're already ahead of me, and that's hardly surprising because I was going to ask you, Fei, next about deep fake videos and the challenge they pose to the credibility of all information flows, particularly potentially in our election next year. We do have a recent graduate of your computer science department here at Stanford who's founded a company which thinks that it can actually make a lot of progress in authenticating or disauthenticating, if I can use that word, videos that are in question. But you've expressed optimism that the authentication has a decent chance of keeping up with the progression of technology. But let me ask you a not purely technological question, and maybe Candy will have thoughts on it too. Once a company renders a judgment that there's a 95% probability that this is false and says these are the technical reasons why, how do we mobilize societal, acceptance of that or credibility for that?
So this is why I think there is a collaboration and partnership between technology business and the educating and informing the society. I think we do, I keep thinking, when I was a kid, I read these little books about when electricity just came to our world, how many accidents and how many just misuse and misunderstanding of electricity. And it takes education, it takes better business, it takes just maybe generations, hopefully for us it's as fast as possible, to educate the world about what this technology is about. I also want to say, Larry, it's not just a company putting a stamp or a nonprofit putting a stamp on this video of Candy is authentic. I actually see technology going all the way to cameras, all the way to the hardware, such that the digital watermarking and authentication can be communicated to users from a more fundamental way. And it will take education and business innovation for the mass to understand it. So next time I see a video of Candy talking to Larry, I will look for that watermark and make sure you guys are real, right? Mm-hmm.
I do have to say, Fei, you were reading books on electricity when you were a little girl. Maybe that's why you ended up where you were.
I'm a nerd.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about two tensions now that involve government in one way or another. One is the tension between the goal of protecting fundamental rights in a digital age and the impulse, desire, campaign in a way to regulate the tech companies in order to protect consumer rights, individual rights. And the EU has kind of led ahead of the US in this regard. But maybe because it's led ahead of the US in that regard, it's been less successful at tech innovation than the US. So how do we balance the need for consumer protection against the need for tech innovation and therefore the need to restrain government regulation so companies can innovate? Do you have any general thoughts on that?
Well, the first that I would say is it goes back to education. It goes with what is being done here, which is that if you're not careful, regulators will regulate even if they don't fundamentally understand what they're regulating. Right? So getting to the place that people actually understand the technology, understand the kinds of things that you were talking about, that there might be technical solutions to this so that we don't chase a problem that we don't necessarily have. So I think this conversation between technologists, companies, and government really has to reach new heights, and it has to enhance its rhythm. The conversations are too slow, and they're not keeping up with what's actually happening in the technology. So it has to be a kind of constant learning and relearning. One of the things that we're doing with Jennifer and engineering is trying to take here at Hoover, actually all of Stanford, is to try to take these technologies and understand what's going on the frontiers. Feifei's serving as our AI expert, but what's going on the frontiers and how will that potentially affect national security, the society, economics, the environment, et cetera. So we have to have a much more rapid, much more intense set of discussions about what's possible, because what I worry about is that political leaders and others who don't really understand the technologies will end up regulating the wrong things, and then you get not good regulation that actually deals with the problems you're worried about, but that does slow innovation. I think the EU is particularly a problem in this regard, and I have a slightly less charitable view than you do, which is they didn't invent any of this, including none of the platforms belong to them. So they've become just the regulatory body, disembodied really from the innovation that is going on. And somehow that needs to close. And this is a place where, since they are among our best friends and strategic partners, I think about something like the privacy debate. Why are we fighting about privacy when the Chinese don't practically even have the word? So I think if we could say we should be, as democratic states, having these discussions, what do we need to regulate? What do we need to be fearful of? What do we not need to be fearful of? That would be a very helpful step, because I think you're right. Right now, the EU is in the lead on regulation. They're not exactly in the lead on innovation.
Yep.
I do want to add and agree that as a technologist, I worry about wrong regulation. And I think that actually there is room for regulation. I especially think AI is such a pervasive and horizontal technology. When rubber meets the road, there are places that we should look into regulation, especially in the existing framework. For example, FDA, right? It's being a regulatory body of food and drugs. And there are, in fact, we have Stanford HAI-affiliated researchers showing that when it comes to smart AI devices, reading physiological and clinical data, FDA is likely to be under-regulating, because we actually care about the accuracy of your blood pressure. But we also have, say, financial industry. These existing regulatory framework need to take a look at what AI is doing. In the meantime, while I'm totally concerned about how we can use this technology and ensure its human-centeredness, I definitely disagree with regulating, pausing the basic research. I did not sign the petition earlier this year asking for the pause of AI technology, because I don't think that's the rational way to approach it. And the world can be a lot better if this technology can achieve its potential to do good to humans, from drug discovery to new materials to scientific discovery to many, many things, and we have to be very careful.
Okay, one last question before we open it up to the audience is maybe the darkest potential side of this technology and of AI in general, which is the potential for a state to build an Orwellian system of surveillance and control. Some people have worried about China in this regard. When you triangulate the surveillance cameras, the monitoring of social media, the creation of a central bank digital currency, the conceptual design for a social credit system. On the other hand, there's massive needs for data in order to do this, and how much should we worry that there's the potential for Orwell to have underestimated the danger to human freedom?
Can I start?
We should worry. I think that's a short answer to this, because this is a powerful technology. And Candy and I often have our little drinks together.
Wine time, we call it.
And she's a Russian expert, and we talk about nuclear, we talk about AI. I just watched Oppenheimer. This is a very powerful technology, and in the hands of wrong state actors, non-state actors, we absolutely should worry. I just want to say one thing, and partially I want to thank Candy for always reminding me. The best way, in my opinion, as an American technologist, is to answer to this worry is to make sure we have a thriving democracy and thriving society that can use this technology for good.
Yeah, I would just add two things. I've often done a thought experiment. Suppose the nuclear, the secret to the nuclear bomb had first been discovered in the Soviet Union or in Nazi Germany. And remember that it was a race in 1943, 1944. We would live in a very different world. Fortunately, even though of the tragedy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, our democracy and our democratic principles and the emergence of norms really did, I think, we were fortunate that the technology was initially in the hands of a democracy. And there's another reason for that. It's not just because Americans are somehow just good. It's because the great danger is that the more centralized authority is, and particularly when it gets centralized in one person, the checks on the uses of these technologies disappear. If I use the example of what happened with the Edward Snowden revelation of the bulk data collection NSA program, I often said to people, I think it was a travesty, but we don't in the United States balance these issues within the one branch of government. So the President of the United States is always going to be more security oriented because he is the commander-in-chief. It's responsibility to protect the country. If you don't believe that, notice that a lot of the, quote, war on terror from George W. Bush was actually adopted by Barack Obama, constitutional lawyer. So the president will do that. The Congress can authorize and reauthorize. And then the courts will ultimately decide what is constitutional and what is not. So we divide responsibility for these trade-offs between three independent branches of government. You simply don't have that in an authoritarian system. And that's why I think dangerous technologies in the hands of an authoritarian system are much worse than dangerous technologies in the hands of a democracy.
I certainly agree with that. Now we have time for Q&A from you. Could you raise your hand? And there are two roving mics. You're in the front row, as Bob Euchre used to say.
That dates you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Dwayne Clark with the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for you guys. Question kind of building off the last one, actually, in regards to democracy and, versus authoritarian systems. We look at, what we're doing here, what the Europeans are doing with AI. Look at what China's doing, and we look at how other countries, developing countries, are viewing our actions. You look at China exporting their technology, surveillance technologies and such to countries and saying, hey, utilize this, do these things. And we're, I'm assuming, exploring kind of similar alternatives. How should we look at navigating this kind of broader view across the globe with AI beyond just our countries, and how does that impact other countries across the globe as we try to figure out and say, hey, democracy is a better move, AI is better here for this versus, what China's trying to sell? Thank you.
Yeah. I'll take this one to start. First of all, I think that just helping countries to understand what the Chinese are doing is really very helpful. Now, to be fair, If you are a potentate dictator in some of these countries, the kinds of things that the Chinese are selling in facial recognition technology and the like, pretty helpful. And so it speaks again to why we ought to care about whether there are more democratic countries in the world than authoritarian ones. It's another argument for the United States actually ought to care about what other countries, what their systems are. I was just a couple of hours ago, I spoke to a group at the Graduate School of Business who are from Latin America. And one of the questions is something I've been thinking a lot about. A lot of the world feels like this is being done to them. So maybe if you're one of the European powers, you've got the power of regulation through the European Commission. You know, if you're China, you're certainly doing your thing. And the United States is very powerful, owning the platforms, the innovation, and the power of the American state. But boy, if you're any place else in the world, you really do feel like it's being done to you. And so one of the things that I think we ought to start to do is we ought to start to broaden the conversation to the global south about some of these issues that we're dealing with. And we can beat the Chinese to that because they don't want to talk about norms. They don't want to talk about how these technologies can be harmful. They just want to sell and reinforce their colonial-like power in the rest of the world. And so I said to this group, why doesn't the Organization of American States take this up? Why doesn't the Summit of Americas take this up? Why are we not discussing this with the African Union? I do think that we are in danger of having the rest of the world left out of a conversation that is fundamentally going to affect them too.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I want to add to something that in order to communicate what this is to the world and really invite them to participate, it is so important we communicate what the positive potentials of this technology is. In fact, every region, every community, every country can still innovate. Even if you're not the Googles and the Metas of the world. I was actually in Candy's old place, the State Department, a couple of months ago, talking to the global ambassadors of all American ambassadors. And I think there are countless healthcare examples, environment examples, agricultural examples we can use to communicate with the global population about what we could do, what this can do, what they can do, and what we can partner to do. And let's not forget about that, because I feel right now it's such a one-sided conversation about AI. We forget what this can do in a positive way.
Yes, over here.
Hi, Ian Eisenberg, Credo AI. I love the title of this talk, Democracy in the Age of AI Algorithms. I would like to ask a kind of get some optimism from both of you. So I've been watching as certain nations take on algorithms to improve our democratic institutions. I think one of the most exciting cases of this is in Taiwan, where they're using relatively simple algorithms, clustering algorithms, combined with mass-scale surveys to really enable a new kind of conversation at a scale that we haven't seen before. There's a potential for next-generation democracy. And I would love to hear both of your perspectives on how these AI systems aren't just potentially a risk for our democratic institutions, but can also enable a way of gathering our kind of joint values, our joint perspectives on issues in a way that we have not been able to do before because we haven't had the technology. Thank you.
I can start. I have many things to say, but I want to say one thing. One of the most exciting, profound outcome of this new generation of Gen AI or large language model AI for me is its impact to education. I personally, as an educator, haven't seen something as profound as this in terms of what it means to education. We now have a technology that can become individual, personal, partner, assistant, tutor to really bring education to to many more people and children and adults' hands in a way we've never seen before. So we have an opportunity, actually. Democracies rely on an educated population, and we have a huge opportunity to use this technology to rethink about our education system, as well as to expand the way, the accessibility of education and what we educate. And I think that's a huge opportunity.
I think there are also experiments literally in kind of town hall democracy, right? In sort of using AI in self-creating democratic communities, if you will, to practice democracy. And I think that these are really very interesting experiments. We have a couple people here at Stanford who study this kind of thing. I think the challenge will be that if we find, either through education or through this more direct democracy, if we were practicing direct democracy using AI and using the internet, what would it look like? And can we therefore interest people in beginning to understand the democratic process and actually use it in this way? We have to not leave others behind in it, right? So I worry a little bit that it'll become kind of boutique rather than something that could be accessed more broadly. The other issue, from my point of view, is that technology is an enabler. Right? It's not either good or bad. How you use it is whether it's good or bad. And if it is going to be good, it has to build on a foundation that's good. And so I worry that if we're not careful, we'll build on a foundation that's already weak. And so it means that if people are going to do this, they have to go back to the first principles of democracy. Trust is one of them. The ability to include is another, because we've had too many, the way we get our information, we're tending to go into tribes. So I don't want it to reinforce tribalism, which is, I think, one of our biggest problems in democracy today. So we have to recognize the dysfunctions in democracy and make sure that's not enabling those dysfunctions rather than breaking them down.
Can I just ask briefly, before I come to Mike McFall, maybe Fei-Fei to you in particular, if we're going to engage and empower the bottom few billion in income, how are we doing on the hardware side in terms of getting them the broadband access that would enable them to really take advantage of this?
First of all, I have to confess, I don't know the details. I do think access to internet is, at this point, very fundamental. And I guess from a technology point of view, not only through the cables, but through the satellites, can we accelerate that? That's back to a more government or business-focused question. We need that.
Yeah, I think we learned during COVID that there were deserts in this regard. A state that shall remain nameless told me that 45% of its citizens did not have access to broadband. And that's essentially like not having running water these days. And so there are multiple efforts. We did some work with AT&T just to try to understand what we've done in the past. And we've spent, I'm going to forget the numbers, but it's like it's several tens of billions of dollars over the years trying to do broadband. And we still aren't making that much progress. And so I think we're going to have to figure out how to do it better, but it's a real problem. And we saw it during COVID when kids couldn't get on to do homework or whatever.
So we got to put it on the policy agenda.
Yeah.
Mike?
So great conversation. I'm Michael McFall, Hoover Fellow, political science professor and director of the Freeman Spogli Institute.
And my former student.
And her former student.
And my neighbor.
And Fei-Fei's neighbor.
In other words, he never left Stanford, but anyway. Yeah.
I left 8 times, but I always come back. And if you ever have the chance to come back to Stanford, you should. I have a question. President Biden signed a new executive order today about, I have it here in front of me, addressing United States investments in certain national security technologies, including AI, and products in countries of concern. And if you read it, it's about, talking about how we're going to try to limit investments that are adverse to our national security interests. I believe that the Communist Party of China is a threat to democracy generally and to the United States, right? So I'm within the framework of the topic. But here's the paradoxical question. Number one, this is not nuclear weapons, right? It's not even chips. How do you, and I'm looking at you, Feifei, as the technologist, how does one actually prevent the flow of artificial intelligence that is adverse to democracy or our security with respect to China? Period. And at the same time, because you said it, education, education, education. I actually think it's in the American national interest to have more education, more information, everybody in China on ChatGPT, right? And let's like do that. How do you balance those two things, right? So you also said it's a horizontal technology, right? It's not like nuclear weapons. So they said they're going to do it. If you were asked by President Biden, how would we implement this executive order? How do we do it with respect to AI?
Right. First of all, you beat me to it. I saw the title of the news. I didn't have time to read. So here's I actually was with another 3 Hoover Fellow yesterday, the Goodfellows podcast, talking a little bit about this. This is a little dirty secret of AI that those of us who work in AI know, but the public doesn't. When you talk about an AI system, for example, ChatGPT, because everybody knows, the algorithm part, to make this happen, the algorithm is still a very small part of it. AI doesn't happen without chips. Let's just face it. It doesn't run on bricks or whatever. So it needs hardware. It also needs, to build AI, you need data. You need tremendous amount of engineering, not just the algorithm engineering, but the infrastructure, the network, a lot of it. You need talent, and you need to know how to productize it and all that. So in a way, this is a long way of saying, if you want to disrupt the flow of AI to certain direction, for example, in this case to China, you have to look at it globally. And my understanding of this presidential executive order is part of this is resource and capital, and of course there was Chip Act and a lot of that. So it's an ecosystem thing. It's not. In the meantime, we talk about this with Condi. I'm still a scientist. I still believe in open science. I think open science is good for humanity. And especially basic science, for example, the AI algorithms, the math, the explorations. I do not believe in the stopping of that. And that might be part of the paradox, because open science help to, educate the world and inspire the world for the use of good, for good. So I don't know if I answered your question. I just think when we think about the flow of AI, we need to think about the flow of the whole technology as a whole and many components of that, not just one.
The only thing I would add, having had some experience, as you did, Mike, with, sort of restrictions during the Cold War, what we called COCOM, which was a set of restrictions. If we're going to try to do this, I'm a little concerned about, quote, investment. I don't really know what that means. So they don't get money from an American VC but they'll get it someplace. So I'm not quite sure what this is trying to achieve, except that maybe you say to American companies, you shouldn't be fueling it, even if somebody else is. I can understand that. But the piece that I think, if we're going to start thinking about, what can you do about the chips? What can you actually control? You want to control as little as possible. The big mistake we made in COCOM during the Cold War was we had gotten to the place by the time I became Special Assistant to President George H.W. Bush where we were controlling things that you could buy at Radio Shack. And it didn't make any sense. And then you start really just ticking off your partners, your international partners who ought to be a part of the regime as well. So, they keep talking about whatever it's high walls and small yards or something. I forget what yeah, right, which whoever wrote that should be fired. But I do think that there's something to that you want to control as little as possible and you want to get as many people on the paper for the things that are really important to control. And then maybe some of this works.
Can I just add one thing? I just realized we have so many policymakers here. The one thing I would not control, I would invite and maximizes the inflow of talents to the United States. Thank you. Especially talents from everywhere from the world, and when they come here, treat them well and do not, call them spies or prosecute them without true evidence. And I think that's so important to United States.
That has actually been America's secret, is that we did actually get talent from everywhere around the world, and we're in great danger of shooting ourselves in the head about that.
And that is one of the major recommendations of our report on the global trade in semiconductors.
Yes. Thank you, Larry.
Bring the best talent from all over the world, and everyone who gets a graduate degree in science, technology, engineering, math, stamp a green card to their diploma. Okay, I'm now violating my rules and instructions to take one last question from someone who deserves a chance to ask it. So go ahead, stand up, introduce yourself, and this will be our last question.
Thank you so much. I'll stand over here. Hi, all. Thank you so much for taking this question. Kind of switching the second part of this title on its head, AI's impact on governance or democracy. I'm curious to hear what you think about democracy's impact on AI. How do we get these questions we've been talking about here tonight to the American people to debate, to input on these issues? And I know the people in this room who work on the Hill are a huge part of that. But how can the rest of us play a role in getting these crucial questions to constituents?
Oh. Well, first of all, we have to make space for the discussion in our democracy of things that are actually important. I don't know if you've watched the news lately, but I can barely watch it. And I don't care which side of the political spectrum you're on. It's like, is this really what I want to be talking about? And so somehow making space for that. I wish that all the hearings that are being held, they were all being held when the Democrats were in charge of the House. Now they're all being held while the Republicans are in the House, and C-SPAN and CNN and everybody wants to cover them. How about somebody actually cover the hearings on AI or cover the hearings on what's happening with technology or the like? And so I think the American people have got to get more demanding somehow, that there is actually space for our policymakers not to just talk to each other, but to talk to us about these issues. Maybe one of the ways that we do that is through the education function. I've been very impressed with some of the students that you have around High or that we have around Hoover. They want to have these discussions. They ought to be then going out into boys and girls clubs and into high schools and into junior high schools and beginning to talk about these things, because there's one thing that happens in democracy if people are ignorant, which is that they are badly led. Sometimes we put it all on the leaders, but it actually has to be that citizens have to be demanding of these things too. And so somehow I think if you want to reverse it and actually make the democracy capable of discussing these things, the democracy has to discuss these things. And right now we're focused on a lot of things that matter a lot less.
I can't agree more. Just to add to what Candy says, I'm actually an immigrant, so one thing I learned as a as a American, new American, is that compared to many other forms of government, a strong democracy as a society at large tend to make the better decisions. And about a month ago, both HAI Associate Director Professor Rob Reich and I had the honor to meet with President Biden to discuss AI, and I really hope one decision we can make for this generation is a serious investment to do AI, to do responsible AI, to lead in AI. And Condi actually inspired me with this term, a moonshot mentality. Recognize that in a strong democracy like ours, we can actually innovate and lead not only the science, but the truly benevolent applications of AI. And that's what I think democracies should do today.
Great. Well, I hope you have enjoyed and learned from this panel as much as I have. I want to thank HAI for organizing this extraordinary event. I want to thank you all for coming. And most of all, please thank our two panelists, Condoleezza Rice and Fei-Fei Li.
Thank you.